How's it going, everybody? Welcome into my review of episode 3 of House of the Dragon, titled Third of His Name. Before we get into the episode here, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for me, like the videos, and let me know what you think so far of the House of Dragon series down in the comments. So far, I am really enjoying it. I'm going to slap that spoiler warning up here again because I will be talking about plot points from the episode. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, make sure to go check it out, then come back here for my review of it. So this episode focuses around three main plot points. The first being the ongoing issue in the Stepstones with the crab feeders. The second mainly revolves around the firstborn son of Viserys and Alicent, named Aegon. And the third really kind of focuses around Rhaenyra and how she's been coping with the last few years, as well as some things that go on in this episode that obviously adds to some of the anger that we've seen with her since the end of the last episode. So now, as I said, years. This episode does take a 3-year jump from episode 2. The first and second episode were about 6 months apart. I know they did mention before the series started there was going to be some pretty significant time jumps. So this is one of the episodes where there was one, as I said, 3 years, which is pretty nuts. So the first part of the episode does show us that the issue with the crab feeders is still ongoing even after 3 years, and that is also mentioned later on to Viserys during the celebration of his son's second birthday. And that's where this episode really does kick off. That's where a lot of the plot points in the episode start to kick off as well. So obviously, you've all seen the episode if you're still watching at this point. There's a second birthday party or second name day party going on for Aegon, the firstborn son. And this is where, you kind of start to, and we all knew it was going to happen. I mean, you knew it when he married Alicent, they're going to have kids, and you knew one of them was going to be a boy. Obviously, if you read the books, you know kind of what happens. But if you haven't, we all knew that this was going to happen. And of course, one of the first things that does happen in this episode, as they're showing Aegon, is Otto is approached by a man, and he tells him, it's like, at this point, you being the hand of the king, it's your job to talk to Viserys and basically get him to name Aegon heir, because it'd be much more likely for the other noble houses to follow Aegon due to the fact that he's a boy. Again, that's just the way that times were in Game of Thrones House of the Dragon universe, so it is what it is right there. And Otto kind of tells him, it's like, I don't think he sees it as easy, and that is something that we see with the character of Viserys in this episode. Is he's got a lot of, obviously he's the king, of course he's gonna have a lot of things going on, but you can tell it all weighs on him. A lot of things weigh on him pretty heavily. I think what he wanted to do about his rightful heir was something that, and he talks about it later on, as we'll talk about, is really one of the things that is causing him the most back and forth. So that's a big. That's like one of the first things that's talked about. And then it cuts to Rhaenyra. She's because he asks, where's my daughter? Has anyone seen her? It cuts to her. She's in the Godwood. She's underneath the tree reading a book and having a bard sing her a song. So Alicent comes out and says, your king requests your presence. So Alicent argues with her a little bit, eventually ends up going. And here this is where you see that obviously Rhaenyra is not happy. And we knew that at the end of the last episode. And you find out that, obviously she's a smart girl. She knows that I think she knows she'd be a good leader, but also knows that a lot of people would probably rather follow Aegon than her when he comes of age. So that's obviously one of the first things you notice with her is there's a lot of, she hasn't shown it, but you can just tell by just the way that she goes about things, is that there's a lot of there's a lot of pent up anger there. During the party, of course, another thing that's on Viserys' mind is the issue going on in the Stepstones. He comes in, he's like, a guy comes in and tells him there's been an emergency at the Stepstones. He's like, it's my son's birthday. It can wait. It's been 3 years. It can wait 3 more days. He keeps telling him, it's like, well, it's your brother. There's a lot of problems there. People are questioning his leadership, and Viserys shuts him down, doesn't want to talk about it. Another thing that's just weighing heavily on his mind when he's dealing with what's going on with his son and his second birthday. So then they mention that a big part of the second birthday is they're going to gather a big group of people and head off to the hunting grounds. They're going to hunt for a stag. They've heard the white stag is out in that area, and they said it's king of the woods, and finding it is a good sign of fortune in the years to come. So that's where they head out to next. Rhaenyra goes with. They're all sitting in the buggy, and he's like, oh, it's great having the whole family together. And Rhaenyra just doesn't really say much. He tries telling her, it's like, you're a princess, you still have duties, and she says, I know, as I'm constantly told. So again, this episode, there's the up and down relationship between Viserys and Rhaenyra. I feel like it's obviously been a lot of down since the years since the last episode. As we saw at the end of the last episode, she was not happy with him. So there's been a lot of down, and I don't think, he knows she's upset, but she hasn't really hasn't really said much. So anyway, so they get to the hunting grounds, and Rhaenyra's out and about walking around, and she gets approached by Jason Lannister, of obviously the Lannister family as we know them from the Game of Thrones series. And he tells her all about Casterly Rock, as well as he said, I don't have a dragon bed, but I can build one. So here's where you find out the next thing that's gonna, obviously Rhaenyra's been dealing with a lot early on. Here's where you kind of find out the next thing that's really gonna set her off. And this sets up her point in the rest of the episode here is he mentions taking her as his wife, which she storms off. She goes and sees Viserys and approaches him and says, like, so this is what I am to you. You're trying to sell me off to the nearest great house so I can get married to them and strengthen their claim. They get into an argument, and there's a bunch of people sitting around, and they start yelling at each other until Otto just says, like, hey, maybe we should, calm this down. Basically calms it down. So it's not a good look, right? King and his daughter yelling at each other. But just another point, just that relationship is just, it's so strained at this point, and you feel bad for Rhaenyra, and she kind of mentioned, and she'll talk about more of that later on. So anyway, the king says, it's your duty to get married, and you will do it. So she actually storms out of the tent, gets on her horse and goes. Criston Cole sees her do it, and he follows her out there, and that's kind of where she stays for a lot of the rest of the episode, is out in the woods with him. And some things happen, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. So as night falls, you notice Viserys probably had a little bit too much wine. He keeps asking his wine guy to keep filling up his cup. So, and this just goes along with what I said earlier about his character. He's got a lot on his mind, a lot that he's struggling with. And this one is really, and that's what I said, like the rightful heir and who he's going to name heir is really what's bothering him. So Alicent notices it. You see them in a scene when they're both outside around a fire, and he tells Alicent, he's like, I had a dream one night, had a son named King, and everything was calm. And then he says, but I've never, he said, I've always been yearning for that dream again. I think he mentioned the first episode that he has a dream over and over again. And this time he admits, he's like, I never had that dream again, and tells her, like, when I named Rhaenyra heir to the throne, I was hoping it would just settle everything down, make everything better. And this is where you see the internal struggle, to where you can tell that he knows the right thing to do. Well, right thing to do for the realm would be to name Aegon heir, but also knows that Rhaenyra would do a great job, and it's the back and forth struggle of what's the right call here. So that gets revisited later on in the episode. He does kind of make a final decision, but again, we'll get into that later on. Also, one thing that was brought up while he was sitting inside drinking his wine was Otto walked up and talking to him about Rhaenyra's marriage choice, and just says she doesn't want to be married off. She's being difficult, of course. He says, if I told her not to marry Jason Lannister, he would do it anyway, because you know how she can be. Just again goes along with Rhaenyra's character, to where she's proud. I wouldn't even call her really stubborn, because she thought that Jason was too arrogant, and he kind of said, like, well, you're kind of the same person. So, but that's an issue that's brought up. And then Otto mentions, well, here's one that's close to home. What if she marries Aegon? And as we know, there is a lot of that type of stuff that goes on in the Targaryen family, and a lot of things that happen with that anyway, just to kind of keep power and whatnot. So that was something that was brought up, and Viserys shut that down fast, where Otto was like, okay, I won't speak any more of it. So that's the last we heard of that. Interesting stuff. So then the next one of the next scenes is you have Rhaenyra and Criston Cole out in the woods. He says we should go back to camp. She doesn't want any of that. She wants to just think a little bit. So next thing you see, they're both sitting around a fire, and he asks, will people follow me if I'm queen? And Criston Cole says, they're not going to have a choice, right? So the next part that happens here is really where you get to start to see, she lets out a little bit of that frustration, because obviously everything up to this point has just been, it's been weighing on her, and you can tell, obviously, because she even mentions to Viserys, like, you want to replace me, and then says, like, you want to replace me, marry me off, just get rid of me, and then obviously name Aegon your heir. So, and as I said, you knew that there was a lot of issues. Like, she was not happy. Then her and Criston Cole get attacked by a boar, to which Criston Cole gets knocked over. The thing was strong. Holy crap! Boar tackles Rhaenyra. She stabs it a couple times. Eventually, she gets her knife knocked out of her hand. Criston Cole ends up killing it. And here's where you see Rhaenyra's anger finally come out. She takes her knife and she stabs the thing probably like 100 times, even though it was already dead. So I think that point was really where you saw that she had a lot of pent up frustration, and that was just her way of finally being able to let some of it out. So next, King Viserys is alerted that, hey, the stag is caught, come kill it. So he goes out to the woods, and it's not the white stag that he was hoping for. And I think this is where this is where he finally gets that realization, because as they said, the white stag was a sign of good fortune, considering he is the king of the woods. So I think part of him, very hungover, of course, from all the wine he drank the night before, part of him, when he saw that, I think it finally clicked that Rhaenyra is the one. Like, this, they say it's good fortune, it's not here, it's a regular stag, so maybe this means that Aegon's just a regular baby, not meant to be king. And then, so he misses the first time, he stabs it in the heart second time, kills it. The next scene, Rhaenyra and Criston Cole are overlooking the mountains, or overlooking the forest, and they both look to their right, and sure enough, there it is, the big white stag. So to me, this is a little bit of symbolism that Rhaenyra, obviously in the eyes of the gods, is meant to be queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and she'd be a great ruler. So when I saw that, I'm like, that's a nice little touch of like almost like foreshadowing, I guess, but also symbolism of everything. So I thought that was pretty cool. A bloodied Rhaenyra comes back to the camp. They end up going back to King's Landing. And then the next scene you see between Rhaenyra and Viserys, it seems like this is another mending point for their relationship, to where Viserys, this is where she brings up, like, you want me replaced? And this is where Viserys says, that's not my intent to replace you. You will be queen, I promise. He said he mentions that he did waver at one point, which we knew because he had talked about that with Alicent at the fire, but then said that, like, this is my final decision. You're the one who's meant to rule. And then he tells her, go seek out, because Alicent said you got to make her, like, tell her to get married, but also make her realize that it's, make her think it's her choice. So he does tell her, it's like, you will get married, but you can go seek out whoever you think would strengthen your claim the most. Go find them, produce heirs. There you go. That's the advice I'm going to give you. So that kind of ends that storyline. Relationship mended a little bit, maybe, but I'm sure knowing these two, it'll go right back downhill after that. So the next scene, we finally get a battle scene in House of the Dragon. I was super happy about this one. So Viserys does finally decide to send aid to Daemon. He sends one of his guards to take a troop, send him and bring the letter to him, telling him that they're going to send them help. The next scene, you do see Corlys, as well as his brother and his son, are strategizing their next moves against the crab feeder. Where they, and you can tell, because it was brought up that a lot of people were questioning Daemon's lead. When he comes back in on his dragon, they talk about a mutiny, and Corlys shuts that down pretty quick and says, that's not happening. Don't talk about mutiny here. It's not happening. And then, of course, when they land, he converges with the rest of the group. The note comes from the guard member, and I think Daemon takes this as a little bit of a slight, obviously saying, like, you guys can't handle it. He's like, but Viserys did say that, I don't want to see my brother die. I don't want to see you guys lose. So we're going to do it. We're going to send you guys help, even if it does cause issues with fight against the Triarchy. We're going to send you guys help. Here you go. This does not sit well with Daemon. As I said, I think he felt slighted. He grabs his helmet, beats the absolute crap out of the guy that brought him the note. They talked about sending somebody in as a sacrificial lamb. So this, obviously, in the next scene, after Daemon completely pummels that guy's face in, you see Daemon in a boat heading across the water, walks through the battlefield, grabs a white piece of cloth, makes sacrifice flag. So there's Daemon waving the flag, right? So obviously the crab feeder sends his armies up, and as one of the guys gets close, this was the most badass thing ever. Daemon pulls out his knife, stabs him, pulls out his sword, and he starts slashing and slicing everybody up. As I said, this was like the first scene where it's like, oh, we're finally getting into some fights. So Daemon, his goal, run, approach Kragus, and get rid of him, right? You get rid of the crab feeder leader, you get rid of the army. Luckily for Daemon, though, the crab feeder, the mercenaries that he hired, he must have got them from the freaking stormtroopers from Star Wars, because they're all sitting there like up on the cliffs shooting bow and arrow at him, and not one of, I think he got hit twice near the end, but man, they all missed. Like, how do you, first, I'm watching that though, I'm like, come on, I get it, this is pretty cool moment, but like, no chance that every archer misses the shot other than 3, and it's like later at the end anyway. So I'm watching this, I'm just like, come on, like, stormtroopers, ridiculous. So as he gets closer, he does get shot a few times. He does get hit a few times, ducks for cover. This is where you see Kragus send the rest of his troops out, and as they start to circle in on Daemon, fire. And I knew it. I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, this is just to try to draw them all out so they can get the dragon, right? Next thing you know, here comes the dragon, burns through a bunch of the crab feeder army. Then the next thing you see, the Velaryon army's up behind Daemon. They come down and start fighting. During all the chaos, they cut to the crab feeder who's rushing into the cave. And Daemon just, gives the look, and you're like, all right, Daemon, let's do this. Daemon runs into the cave as the fighting goes on. Next thing you know, here comes Daemon out carrying the corpse of the crab feeder. Oh, like, it was just such a cool moment. And this is where Daemon's character now, I don't know what to think, because I thought they were really kind of playing Daemon off to be the villain here. But after seeing that, like, that was an incredibly badass moment. It was absolutely amazing. A great ending to a really, really good episode. Obviously, this is just typical. This is classic Game of Thrones type stuff, right? Like, it's drama, and finally there's some action. I thought this was a really, really good episode. But again, I want to know what you guys think. Let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys next week for my review of episode 4.